Hello, my name is Lee Galloway. Welcome to this session on what type of teacher are you? There is a handout that goes with this session, however you don't need it to follow along. In fact, I prefer you don't actually. It can be distracting. It does summarize some of my key points. It has references and a way to contact me for questions. So, teachers are different, but how are they different? I got a whole new insight into this by reading a book called Developing Talent in Young People, written by Harold Bloom, published in 1985. I read it sometime in the 90s. This book was the result of a study that was done of 24 concert pianists. The study was designed to find out what they had in common. What was the commonality that produced this level of success? The results were a little surprising, to me anyway. They've discovered that the majority of these concert pianists had 3 different teachers in their upbringing. Not just 3 different teachers, but 3 completely different types of teachers. And the book describes each of these teachers and their teaching style and what they taught and all of those details. The first teacher that most of these pianists had was what you might call a neighborhood teacher. It's somebody who was nearby or perhaps recommended by a friend, maybe by a nearby family. The striking thing about this teacher is it's not an outstanding teacher. It's not a teacher that has some fancy resume. It's not a teacher who's known for producing great talent. But it's just the neighborhood teacher. The one thing that this teacher had in common in all these cases is the teacher had a great joy for music and for teaching and for the piano. Now, I'm going to refer to the piano a lot because this study is about pianists, but it's very clear to me that the implications of the study apply equally to musicians of any instrument. At any rate, this first teacher, the teaching style was, I would call it a little lackadaisical. The teacher did not put great demands on the student. They didn't have a lot of specifics in their assignments. And in most of these cases, there was hardly any technique taught. But the one thing the teacher had was this great joy and this love. And it appears to transfer to the students. The student really fell in love with the piano and with music and with taking lessons. And parents found after a while that these particular students seemed very inspired and were really anxious to do their best. So the parents decided that maybe they need a different kind of teacher, maybe someone a little more intense, I guess you might say. In some cases, it was the teacher herself who recommended the change to a new teacher. This time, the parents did a little more research. They were looking for a qualified teacher. They were looking for a teacher who had a good resume, a teacher who was known for turning out talent, and they found one. And so these students started with their second teacher, usually around 2 to 4 years after having started with the first teacher. Now, the teaching style of the second teacher is completely different. This was a much more intensive kind of a situation. The students described the lessons as very intense, very detailed. Every little aspect of music, the shape of the hand, the phrasing, the sound quality, and a lot more technique. There was a lot more emphasis on technique. For many of these students, it was the first time they were exposed to technique. For some of them, they'd heard of it before, but the level of intensity was new. Now, I have nicknames for these teachers. I refer to the first teacher as the Type 1 teacher of love. The second one I refer to as the Type 2 teacher of skills. This is the teacher who taught the student the skills that they needed to go on to become the success that they eventually became. And students stayed with this teacher through high school. Now, when they got to high school, these students were becoming known in the community because they were performing around and they were winning competitions. And when they got to the end of high school, the parents did another little research study to find just the right university with just the right master teacher who might carry these students on their way to their next level. Now, we know these teachers. These are master teachers that we hire for our conferences. They come and give master classes and presentations, and some of them are very well known. In fact, what's interesting is that 5 fairly well-known master teachers taught 16 out of these 24 students. It says something about the level of teaching, I think. Now, what's so interesting about this for me is I had always assumed that if a student made it to the top, they must have started at the age of 4 with their scales and their technique and their etude and all that intensity from day one. I mean, wouldn't you think that's what it would take to get to the top? But that was not the case. The majority of these pianists had what some might call a lame start with an average teacher. So how to explain this? Well, once again, the first aspect of that first teacher was love and joy, and it transferred to the student. This student became inspired. This student became motivated. This student developed drive. And that's what took them through the next stages. In fact, this study, I think, really answers the age-old question of which is more important, drive or natural talent. In the case of this study, some parents were saying things like, wow, we thought his brother was going to be the one that was going to excel. So it reinforces it was really the drive that was developed through that love that took them all the way. I started teaching when I was about 14, and I was teaching instinctively and intuitively. In other words, I didn't know what I was doing. But I had a lot of fun with it, and my students had fun with it. They were mostly my classmates and their siblings. And when I finally got to the college age, I was teaching a lot of students. And I majored in music because I wanted to see if I knew what I was doing, or I wanted to fill in any gaps that I had. And I did learn a lot. I learned pedagogy and the history of music and all of those things that I didn't know before. But what really made a difference for me was when I joined my Music Teacher Association. I started going to local sessions. I started going to state conferences. I started going to the national conferences. And this was the first time I saw young students who were really talented. It was amazing to see, for example, some 8-year-old who could play this dazzling piece. I hadn't really experienced that before, and my students certainly weren't doing that. Well, I decided that I wanted to do that. I wanted to be able to do that. And so I became just devoted to going to these conferences year after year, going to the master classes especially, where I could witness really high quality teaching and see what that looked like, and continuing my own study as well. And I'm happy to say I have developed those skills. I would call myself one of those teachers of skills who produce talent, because I do have students now who win competitions and go on to become musicians and music teachers. And this has been very satisfying for me. But reading this study gave me a new insight and a new appreciation for that type 1 teaching, that teaching of love. And I realize now how important that was for the motivation and the drive of these students. So now I had a new goal. Rather than just trying to become the type 2 teacher of skills, now, if I have a beginning student, I go into the mode of the type 1 teacher of love. When I have a beginning student, I have one goal and one goal only, and that goal is to get that student to fall in love with music, with teaching, with the piano, and, well, with me. And if that means I'm not going to teach scales for a while, I'm not going to teach scales for a while. I don't put my early students into evaluation programs for several years because I do not want to subject them to that kind of intensity until I know they're into it. So if I teach from the standpoint that we're going to love this and we're going to have fun, and eventually they get to that point where they do, then I know I can shift gears and I can become that type 2 teacher and take them the next step of the way. I went to a pedagogical conference not long ago. It was a week-long series of sessions and master classes on teaching piano, and there was a piano recital every night. And the first night was this woman who played a very impressive program, I have to say. Her technique was pretty amazing. But there was something missing. When I got to the end of the program, I realized she's just playing a lot of bombastic pieces that show off her technical ability. I didn't really feel moved. But the real revelation was the next day. She gave a session called The Life of a Concert Pianist. She described how her parents decided she was going to become a concert pianist. And they found some teacher for her at the age of 4. And that teacher started in with the scales and the etude and all the intensity that you might expect. She said how on her 5th birthday, she asked if that one day she could skip practice. She got a resounding no. Her parents were determined. And she really didn't have any choice. So she stayed with this teacher through her teenage years. Now, when she became a teenager, she looked about to see what she might want to do. She wanted to do something that gave her pleasure, gave her joy. Apparently, the piano didn't. But she had to acknowledge that was the one thing she could do. So reluctantly, she became a concert pianist. She said she hates it. She hates everything about it. She hates the program she has to play. She hates the planning. She hates dealing with the people. She hates the travel. I got to tell you, I was shocked. And one of the reasons is because I know concert pianists, and I know this is not their typical experience. The concert pianists I know love what they do. But she obviously didn't. There was a question and answer period, and I asked her, is there ever anything you like about it at all? And she said, once in a great while, there's a program that's enjoyable, and the people are pleasant, and the piano's pretty good. But she stressed this was very rare. Now, what I would like to suggest or project, I think her parents found her a type 2 teacher of skills who had no concept of the importance of joy and love in music. And this is the result. I'm going to summarize by giving a few suggestions. If you're a type 3 teacher, which is the college teacher, I refer to as the master teacher, much of what I said in my session probably is not that relevant to you. However, it may give you some insight on the students that come to you and why some are more motivated than others. If you're a type 2 teacher of skills, may I suggest, if you ever get a beginning student, or actually any student who seems not very motivated, that you take a chapter from the type 1 style of teaching. Loosen up a little bit. Try to have some fun with the lesson. Maybe lessen your requirements for a little while and see if you can get that student to fall in love with it. Because if they do, then they'll have the motivation and the drive to go forward, and it's going to make your job easier. If you're a type 1 teacher of love, well, I think you're doing a great thing. You're producing lovers of music. However, I suggest you do what I do and go on and continue your study and develop the ability to be a teacher of skills. Go to the conferences, go to master classes, pencil and paper in hand. Look at how that teaching looks like and continue your own study. The bottom line is to be flexible. Be able to provide what the student needs. If the student needs a little motivation, learn how to have some fun and produce that love. If the student's already there, then be able to shift gears and become the teacher of skills and give them the skills that they need to be successful. Well, I hope this has been interesting for you and entertaining. If you get my handout, you'll see the references that I make and also my contact information. I'm going to give you my contact information in case you don't have the handout. My email is very simple. It's my name, lee@leegalloway.com. Please write with questions or to continue the conversation. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.